Plastic is one of the most widely used materials in the world. It is cheap, convenient, sanitary, durable, and lightweight. It is used for making medical products, toys, packaging material, and millions of other items. Plastic is so much a part of our lives today that it is hard to imagine that 80 years ago, plastic was almost unknown. Today, however, we also know that plastic has come at a tremendous cost to the environment and to human health.
We have a major problem here in Jamaica. There are some persons who are separating waste. We have some recycling facilities, but for the most part, they are not recycled. And these will have devastating effects on human health, on the environment, and even our marine health.
So let's take a journey into the world of plastics and see why we now need to rethink the role that they play in our lives. Most plastic is made from fossil fuels, gas or oil, which are refined into ethane and propane, which are then heat treated to turn them into ethylene and propylene. Every stage requires a lot of energy, so about 6% of the world's consumption of fossil fuels is used to make plastics.
Plastic is a problem from its cradle to its grave. This versatile, convenient, inexpensive product is one of global warming's worst enemy. At conception, its main ingredients are pulled from freshly extracted fossil fuels in oil refineries and gas processing plants. Naphtha, a crude oil-based substance, and ethane, a liquid natural gas.
Our consumption of plastics is increasing. Of all the plastic that has ever been made, over half was produced in the last 15 years, and almost none of that, not even 10%, has been recycled. By 2050, we will be using about 20% of the world's fossil fuels just to make plastic. At that point, plastic alone will be responsible for nearly 15% of the world's carbon emissions.
At every stage, including as waste, plastic continues to impact the amount of CO2 that is in the atmosphere and subsequently climate change. Collectively, we emit around 50 billion tons of CO2 annually, with atmospheric concentration of 414 parts per million. This means that at every stage, plastic contributes to this.
98 to 99% are derived from fossil fuels for their production. And whilst their role in climate change has probably been missed by a lot of consumers or not taken account of, in actual fact, by 2030, greenhouse gas emissions from plastics production and the full life cycle, including waste disposal, will actually outcompete coal-fired power plants by 2030. The current contribution is approximately 6% with current production and usage, and by 2050 that's predicted to be in excess of 15% of the global carbon footprint.
The world's leaders met at the COP26 meeting in Glasgow last November to talk about climate change, but they failed to agree on the actions needed. As a result, the world is going to be at least 2.4 degrees warmer. That does not sound like much, but it means storms, floods, and droughts that will force over 150 million people to become refugees by 2050. It means that the Caribbean will be hammered by major hurricanes year after year, with no time to build back between storms. It means that the ice caps and glaciers will melt, and the sea will rise, drowning cities and airports. So, plastics are indeed useful, but we are going to pay a very high price for that convenience, and future generations will pay an even higher price.
With climate change, we're expecting to see more intense hurricanes, category 4 and 5 hurricanes. And we're also expecting more GHG emissions in the atmosphere. Usually persons make the connection with plastics in terms of the increase in the GHG emissions and so increase of global warming. But I want to stress the fact that we find these plastics a lot in drains and near to water bodies. And so if we continue to dispose of them in the drains and in the water bodies, and then we have these increases in category 4 and 5 storms, more rainfall, heavier winds causing very disastrous floods.
Climate change, the mother of all externalities, is a sensitive and high consequence issue for small island developing states. The adverse effects of climate change are not restricted to SIDS. However, the tragedy of the predicament of SIDS is the proportional impact of climate change. SIDS are nations with varying political and economic power and can be categorized as islands with high vulnerabilities and limited adaptive capacity that make minuscule contributions, less than 0.0035% to total global greenhouse gas emissions.
But that's not where the story ends. Plastics are useful precisely because they are cost-effective, durable, and resistant to decomposition. But every plastic product is eventually thrown out, and less than 10% is recycled. So, what happens to all the millions of tons of plastic that are discarded? Some of it is burned, which means that its carbon content is already in the atmosphere. But most of it has ended up in garbage dumps or in the sea. There are now vast areas, thousands of square miles of oceans covered with plastic garbage, choking and killing marine life. Discarded fishing nets, for example, can drift across the oceans for decades, catching and killing fish.
Plastics are a very important part of daily living here in Jamaica. A lot of the plastics that we use are for food and for food packaging industry, among other things. But the thing is that as a developing nation here in Jamaica, we import a lot of plastics and we don't dispose of them properly because we may not have enough recycling facilities to do so. And so 15% of the waste that households generate are actually plastics, polyethylene, which if left in the environment is very disastrous or toxic to our soil as well as the atmosphere when it remains in the landfills, not recycled.
The impacts of mismanaged plastic waste on the climate, on livelihoods, and on the ecosystems of developing countries are an urgent development challenge which requires system thinking. It requires holistic, multi-sectoral, targeted, innovative behavioral change mechanisms alongside the embracing of circular flow models. Developing countries are often at the consumer end of the product life cycle, which excludes them from the design and raw material selection phase. However, the good news is that there are a growing number of examples being implemented, which minimizes the need for the final disposal of waste into the environment and reduces the mining of virgin fossil fuels.
By engaging local communities from reef to reef, we can reduce ocean pollution, preserve ocean health, increase resilience to climate impacts, and reduce overall GHG emissions.
Largely, emissions are derived during production in refineries, during the cracking process, and other related petrochemical facilities. There are some releases of greenhouse gas emissions during transportation and use of consumer plastics, and then the other large contributor is when at the end of life, so when plastics are either used waste to energy, in facilities where they can be combusted at high temperatures. That leads to greenhouse gas emissions. But in many jurisdictions, including third world countries and small island states, there's illegal burning and combustion of plastics. All of this contributes to greenhouse gas emissions.
Presently, we are on Dallin Street in Savannah Lamar, and in the town of Savannah Lamar, when it rains, we have the water flowing from Upper Beckford Street, that is in the commercial area, and it comes down Beckford Street. Alright, you see right now, there are lots of plastic bags, even though we're not having any flooding and so.
The plastic garbage then very slowly breaks apart into tiny fragments called microplastics. These are taken up by microscopic plants called phytoplankton and minute animals called zooplankton, which are then eaten by fish, which are then eaten by humans. Microplastic dust also blows from the garbage dumps and the seashores, fills the air and is inhaled by humans. Plastic cups, plates, knives, forks and bottles shed tiny fragments of microplastics which humans consume along with their food and drink. The average person in countries like the United States of America now consumes from 50,000 to 150,000 fragments of microplastics every year. Babies get a particularly heavy dose as their milk bottles and nipples shed microplastics which are taken up in the brain, muscle, liver, lungs, spleen, kidneys, and other organs. So plastic is poisoning us.
Whenever all these bottles that they throw in the river or cork, they're full of water. So whenever they flush to the sea, they're under the sea bottom.
Okay.
So whenever we sell our nets, sometimes you understand you diving, like you're snorkeling, you see a lot of trash, like plastic, like that the catching stands and cannot float, that it can come back to the beach, that we can pick up to throw in the garbage bin. They lie underneath the ocean, and that's not good for us, or good for our environment.
We all know the plastic are pollution and poison, so most likely it affect, right? Because as long as you have the plastic, you have always have plastic issue.
So what would you want other people in the community to do to reduce the plastic waste?
Just if we have less plastic,
That's the only way.
that's the only solution.
We catch fish already, and when we catch my plastic, I take out time belly. You know?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, fish eat the plastic and it kill them.
It's killing them, yeah.
Yeah, it's killing them. So, right now, all of them plastic here come from the gutter. They drain them. One of them, when the people them flush them in, when the rain come heavy, you wash to the sea. And you see, you wash it up back on land. Some go for a sea and some come on land.
Plastics in the ocean may also interfere with the ocean's capacity to absorb and sequester carbon dioxide. Earth's oceans have absorbed 20 to 40% of all anthropogenic carbon emitted since the Industrial Revolution. Microscopic plants like phytoplankton and animals, zooplankton, play a critical role in the biological carbon pump that captures the carbon at the ocean's surface and transports it into the deep oceans, preventing it from re-entering the atmosphere. Around the world, these planktons are being contaminated with microplastics and are being impacted by macroplastic. Plastic pollution can reduce the ability of phytoplankton to fix carbon through photosynthesis. It can also reduce the metabolic rates, reproductive success, and survival of zooplankton that transfers the carbon to the deep ocean. Research into these impacts is still in its infancy, but early indications are that plastic pollution interferes with the largest natural carbon sink on the planet. What are we doing about this? The big manufacturers and users mostly prefer initiatives to recover and recycle plastic bottles and so on, but these have been a dismal failure overall, with less than 10% of plastic waste being recovered. So some countries are now introducing legislation and regulations to deal with some aspect of the problem. It is generally agreed that single-use plastics, packaging, disposable cutlery, etc., is one of the biggest concerns, as these materials get used just once before being thrown out. Jamaica is one of the countries taking steps to ban some forms of plastic use. On January 1, 2021, the third phase of the plastic ban came into effect, and agencies like the National Solid Waste Management Authority have been developing initiatives in several communities. One of them is the Plastic Waste Minimization Project. Let's take a look.
The National Solid Waste Management Authority pulled out all the stops to get the residents engaged.
Well, I like the local thing what I go on. Take care of the plastic them, because it make a mess, a real mess in the gully and all around, you see me?
This plastic waste minimization project is a wonderful thing because it teaches persons how to sort their garbage and how to properly dispose, because as environmental wardens we have to educate.
We have other partners, namely 360 and recycling partners, which we continue to work with, and we will work with those groups and to see if we can have a sustainable livelihood for the plastic waste being generated by the community.
Laced with a host of other government agencies, the Plastic Waste Minimization Project is no doubt at the front and center of the government's objective to tackle climate change.
The main objective is to build climate resilience in the fisheries sector and also to introduce alternative livelihoods to fishermen. Jamaica is experiencing different levels of climate change. So we are here today to share some of the information with the fisher folks of Raytown, because Jamaica is overfished and we are affected by climate change.
The Plastic Waste Minimization Project is one of many responses to the problem of garbage destroying marine life.
GhostNet accounts for approximately 70% in terms of weight of the plastic that is out there in the marine environment.
It's a good look. That's how the residents are describing the National Solid Waste Management Authority's initiative, the Plastic Waste Minimization Project, right here in Raytown.
This is not something that governments can do alone. Community action is also essential. Earth Ambassadors, a group of young people from across the globe, is one of the leading organizations dedicating their time and resources to deal with the problems of the pollution, damage to health, damage to the environment, and climate change caused by plastics. Let's look at one of their activities.
The restoration of the ecological system has been in the works under various governments and worldwide agencies for quite some time now. As the need for the acknowledgement of climate change is more evident than ever, these young people are making their mark in the fight for the planet. The group, comprised mostly of graduates of the Caribbean Maritime University, embraced the challenge to take on this project to transform our coastlines one community at a time. The residents welcomed the group's undertaking and pledged to work with them to keep their surroundings clean.
We've never had an amazing group like this come and partner with us from a different part of the island. It's usually just some of the fishermen and some of the kids from Podgy Beach.
Today's activity will not only leave an indelible mark on the citizens of Port Maria, but also spur them on to become more responsive to the care of their environs.
This initiative, we can boldly and proudly say that it will last for a very long time because it is now a part of us, it is now our lifestyle where we practice our 7 R's to waste management, which includes rethink, refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, recycle, and reflect.
And do you think this initiative will have a lasting impact on the residents here at Paji Beach?
I'm hoping that they will reflect and say, you know, I should probably reduce my use on this item. And then in return, they will, you know, inform their friends and family and educate them as well. And their other friends and families will educate their friends and families as well.
The Port Maria Police Hierarchy was in full support of the day's activities and even pledged to become partners with the organization.
So of course we are very elated to see young people within our space and in a positive light. That is always very commendable. Groups that really speaks to the environment is really groups that we endorse.
Young people are usually at the forefront of revolutions, and Earth Ambassadeurs are hoping this initiative will indeed effect the change they seek.
It's very encouraging. We have been spending the last 2 weeks or so just speaking with persons in the community, getting them more environmentally aware, because we recognize that persons do not even realize the kind of damage they're doing to the environment in their simple daily actions. And so we've been spending a lot of time, particularly with the fisher folks, just teaching them how to protect this area, and that's part of what we're hoping to achieve. In every community that we go, we do not just go to clean and leave it, but we go to educate with the view that we will ultimately change behavior. And as they practice our 7 R's, 2 of those R's really speak about our transformation in thought, and that's our first R being rethink and the last R being reflect. Because each time you go through that process, we ask you to reflect on what you just did and to see whether or not you could have improved on it. And then you rethink how you can start the process again, and you go through the cycle. So we spend a lot of time investing in the communities to in the long-term view, to change behavior so we can have a better relationship with nature.
In a very short time, plastic has become a part of our lives. They are cheap, useful, and convenient. Now that we know the cost of our health and to our world, however, we must find ways to reduce the tonnage of plastics that we use and discard. Part of the answer is to switch to alternative materials. Some packaging manufacturers, for example, are switching to products that are made from plants, not fossil fuels, and which can be safely composted to return to the soil after use. But it will take many years before these substitutes are available on the scale required. So until then, we have to use less plastic to reduce waste and recover the waste plastic that we're dumping on our land and into our seas. Governments cannot do this alone. All of us have our part. We all have to change our habits, buy less plastic materials, and produce less plastic waste. We have to do this for ourselves, for future generations, and for the world in which we live. Every mickle mek a muckle. Small things, when combined one by one, can have a big effect.